Hello to you all. Welcome to this webinar hosted by Cambridge University Land Society and sponsored by Savills. Cambridge University Land Society is an informal alumni society of the Departments of Land Economy and Architecture here at the University of Cambridge, and we were formed about 60 years ago. Today, we're discussing water. And as you probably just heard from that message, we will be recording this webinar so that we can share it afterwards as well. If I could just ask you, Liberty, to take the slide off, and we'll come on to our panelists in a second. But I just wanted to start by setting out the scene in terms of water. Globally, buildings and construction account for 15% of global fresh water use. And by 2030, it's predicted there'll be a demand of some 40% between supply and demand, with over the half of the world's population lacking safe drinking water by 2050. And at the same time as that, we're seeing increasingly powerful hurricanes, severe thunderstorms and floods, all driving not just human disruption, but built environment destruction, as we saw only too clearly in Valencia last October and many cities around the world on almost a daily basis. This year, droughts are already declared in Yorkshire and northwest England, following the warmest and driest spring in more than half a century. And last week, the Environment Agency warned about future water shortages in England and the need to reduce water demand from an average of around 140 litres per person per day to 110 litres per person per day. This Thursday, the UK Green Building Council will launch the UK Climate Resilience Roadmap, created in partnership with members and industry to outline the unified and actionable steps towards a more resilient built environment. Resilience to water scarcity and water surges is a big yet understated challenge in the built environment. It reminds me of a WWF quote that if climate change is a shark, then water are its teeth, the bite of which could be most felt in the built environment. Now, to discuss these kinds of challenges and opportunities of water resilience, we have this distinguished panel of contributors who, as I'm sure you'll appreciate, represent the full water value chain. I'll ask them each to introduce themselves and put forward, in turn, their point of view across for a few minutes before we then will go into a discussion. And I'd love for you to join in. Please add your questions for the panelists via the Q&A button. So it gives me great pleasure to kick off this morning by inviting Kelly Hewson Fisher from Savills to put forward her opening thought. Kelly, over to you.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. It's really great to be here on this panel. I'm Kelly Hewson Fisher. I'm a director and head of rural research in Savills. So the research team is an 11-strong team working across the UK rural sector, bringing thought leadership and focusing really on policy, data and research. So when I was planning my introduction to today's webinar, it really took me back to look at my career, and water has touched every part of that. So I thought it was really interesting to sort of take a gallop through my career and where I've worked in that water space and what I've learnt along the way, and then finishing with a closing statement. So initially I was working with landowners and farmers, so started my career as a consultant, but looking at how water enters farmland, the pathway it takes, the impacts that it has, and then how it leaves the farm. So here we looked at the mitigation measures that we could deploy within that farming space to reduce and limit any negative impacts. So looking at things like diverting water off tracks, looking at improving soil health, and dropping a fact quite early on here. So did you know that for every 1% increase in soil organic matter, this equates to a water holding capacity increase of 354,000 litres a hectare? And now there are lots of caveats around that, to a depth of 30 centimetres, dependent on soil type. But hopefully you'll agree that actually looking at land, looking at soil health, we can really start to build resilience within our systems. I then spent an interesting 7 years working in Anglian Water's catchment management team. And this was really at the start of catchment management within water companies, where the two sectors, the agricultural sector and the water company, would like to work together to really develop solutions fit for both to improve water quality and quantity. And for me, this role really highlighted the importance of a number of areas. So 4 I just want to highlight. The first is collaboration. We can achieve great things by working together. The second is relationships. Networks are absolutely vital in this space to work together to drive those solutions going forward. Behaviour change, an acceptance that change is required, and often coming to the table with a completely different mindset in order to look at the art of the impossible sometimes to again drive those solutions. And a collective responsibility. So rather than this blame game, it's this sector's fault or that sector is to blame, we all need to take responsibility. We all need to take accountability, and we all need to look at how we can move forward. I then spent a couple of years as the National Farmers Union's water resources specialist. And here I got really involved with policy. So working with ministers, working with regulators, as well as stakeholders on the ground. Interestingly, the water resources regional groups in England had only been going a couple of years at that point, and I really got involved in those, bringing that agricultural perspective. These groups, and we've just had the second iteration of the National Framework for Water Resources published, look to create a multi-sector water resources plan for the future. On the face of it, this has to be applauded and sounds simple. Let's work together to create a plan for the future. But the challenges have been and continue to be significant. There are 3 areas here. The first is funding. So who funds the support for the different sectors? We have water companies, we have individual farmers, we have the energy sector, and we have the environment, to name a few. And who funds the solutions put forward for those sectors, or their contribution to those solutions? Collaboration, you've got sectors that historically haven't worked together or have only started to work together more recently. So how can we bring that collaborative effect to the table? And a lack of water resources planning by some sectors. So we know that the water companies have their long-term water resources planning regime in place, but other sectors, such as individual farmers, potentially don't have a water resources plan. And collectively, how do we bring all of those plans together from those individual farmers to create an overall plan for the agricultural sector? They're not challenges that don't have solutions, but what we do need to do is work through them to ensure that we can look at the future. The national framework, I feel, across England has certainly made inroads and will continue to do so. And a stark reminder of the water challenge, and Munish, you mentioned some in your introduction, but the national framework state that across England 5 billion litres of water per day will be required by 2055. And this is really being driven by a number of factors: population growth, climate change impact, and the need to continue to protect the environment. And a reminder that that figure is just for drinking water. It does not take into account the other sectors that I've mentioned: agriculture, energy. And so really we're looking at a figure in excess of that 5 billion for the future. So what have I learnt over my career working in this water space? I've learnt that land use can support effective water management. The rural sector itself can provide a toolbox of solutions which support sustainable systems of water management, from improving soil health, erecting storage reservoirs, and developing nature-based solutions. In terms of nature-based solutions, I just want to pick up on 3 before I pass over. But sustainable drainage systems, we've just had the new standards for SUDS published on the 19th of June. And these standards provide information for designers, for property developers, local authorities, other interested parties, and they look at providing 11 principles which underpin 7 standards approaching surface water management schemes. There is a feeling in the industry that these haven't really gone far enough, and whilst SUDs can be ultra effective, they do need to be designed really well, and we might pick up on that in later conversations through this webinar. Another element of nature-based solutions is nutrient neutrality to reduce or mitigate nutrients entering watercourses. And from an agricultural perspective, these can come from livestock and also inorganic fertilisers that we use on our crops. So solutions here could include constructing a wetland. It could be other elements as well that we pull together. And the last one I just wanted to mention was natural flood management. And again, we might pick up on this in our conversations in a little while. But solutions that are deployed to control floodwaters and reduce the risk of flooding downstream. So this could include river restoration, re-meandering of rivers, which I've seen examples of, and it works superbly. And also in-river solutions, which again, I've seen examples of and been involved in trials looking at improving water quality and quantity. And these solutions could be things like leaky dams, but not only improving water resilience and water sustainability for the future, but also increasing biodiversity and having lots of other benefits off the back of them as well. So my concluding remark is we all need to plan. The water economy is critical for the future. Silo thinking will not work. We need a collaborative approach. Thank you very much. I look forward to the discussions, and I'm going to pass to Andrew.
Thank you, Kelly, and a very rainy welcome here from Essex, I'm pleased to say. So I'm Andrew, the Sustainability Director for the Hill Group. We're a family-owned and operated house builder. We began trading in 1999 with a diversified operating model delivering mixed tenure homes and places in Cambridge and London and 11 counties, including Bristol and beyond to Bristol, Coventry and Oxford by way of further example. The role of water in homes and building is often underrepresented in broader sustainability conversations, including our own multi-stakeholder double materiality assessments and sustainability-linked loans. Spatial plans, places and buildings must shift from being water users to contributors to wider resilience. Integrated blue, green and grey infrastructure should underpin place-based solutions in urban, suburban and rural locations. Smarter design, fixtures, fittings and labelling, leak detection, rainwater harvesting, grey water use can reduce demand significantly, but innovation alone will not deliver resilience. It must be backed by stronger national and regional policy, clear water efficiency regulations for both retrofit and new builds, incentives for water reuse, and mechanisms like water offsetting where development restores local water systems. Without this, innovation risk being fragmented and inequitable. Plus, we also need residents and users to pivot their behaviours to be more sustainable, whilst recognising water recycling comes with new maintenance regimes and also complexity. Water resilience must also shape the places and affordable place keeping. Designing with water via permeable surfaces, sustainable drainage and blue spaces supports wellbeing, strengthens local identity and mitigates risks like flooding and the urban heat island effect. But this must work across home types, tenures and communities. That's why we support the Future Homes Hub and its collaborative multi-stakeholder work for its One Plan, scaling up delivery, and the Water Ready support report, setting practical water efficiency targets of 105 litres per person per day, compared with building regulations, or current building regulations, of 125 litres, reducing to 100 litres in the late 2020s and below 90 from the mid-2030s. We also welcome the leadership in transitioning towards water smart communities that both Bryony and George will talk about in a few moments. Finally, while valuers, lenders and investors have started to price sustainable homes for their predicted energy and carbon performance, we must also properly value blue and green infrastructure too. These resilience and adaptation features are vital to ensuring a fair and just transition and increase the desirability of the homes and the places that we create. I now pass you over to Bryony. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Good morning, everyone. So I'm Bryony Thorpe, and I'm jointly head of water resources, efficiency and drinking water at Defra, the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. And that's together with my job share partner, Jill Brennan, which is why I've sort of adopted her surname on screen as well. And you've already heard from Kelly and Andrew how embedding water resilience across industry is having a huge impact. My role is to ensure that government is using the policy and legislative opportunities to support this work and to secure water resilience for the future. And I think it's fair to say the scale of this challenge is absolutely huge. Munish and Kelly have also mentioned the National Framework for Water Resources, an updated version of which was launched last week on Tuesday. The first national framework, published in 2020 by the Environment Agency, who obviously we work very closely with, set out the enormity of how demand for water is forecast to outstrip supply in coming years. This new national framework, the updated one, describes the next steps that need to be taken to build on the work that's already been done. And as we've already been heard, it outlines that by 2055, current predictions indicate that there will be a further 8 million people living in England requiring housing and new towns. And we will need an additional 5 billion litres of water a day, which is a significant deficit that we need to meet. A further 1 billion litres may be needed by 2055 for water use other than the public water supply, which Kelly mentioned, such as energy security and food production. Alongside all of this, the government has ambitious plans for growth, the growth mission. That includes a 10-year industrial strategy, plans to increase growth in AI and data centres and in the energy sectors, and to build 1.5 million new homes. Secure and resilient water supplies are vital to enabling this growth. It simply can't happen without water. In some areas, we're already seeing that growth in the built environment are being limited by water scarcity. For example, in Cambridge, which I'm sure Andrew knows all too well, and in North Sussex, housing development has in some cases been blocked or delayed, as has industrial development. So this isn't a challenge that we can or that we will ignore. And moving on to what we're doing in government. So we like to talk about having a twin track approach to a water resilient future. So firstly, we're looking at increasing our water supply and creating new supplies through more water infrastructure, such as reservoirs and transfers, and improved infrastructure, so things like fixing leaks. Through the price review process, there is now £8 billion to build 9 new reservoirs, as well as water recycling schemes and water transfers. And this increasing supply looks to close around 1/3 of the 5 billion litres a day deficit. So the other 2/3 has to come from demand management measures. And we think it can, and the built environment has a huge part to play in this. So what we're currently working on in this space, firstly, a national mandatory water efficiency label for things like washing machines, showers and taps to enable and encourage water efficient choices in homes and in non-household developments. And additionally, a review of water efficiency standards for homes. So we'll soon be launching a consultation on plans to review water efficiency standards in Part G of the Building Regulations 2010. And this is probably the policy measure of most interest in this forum. The consultation will look at lowering the mandatory water efficiency standard and the optional water efficiency standard for areas of serious water stress, and also revising the way in which water efficiency in new homes is calculated. So looking at revising the water calculator and or the fittings-based approach. And the consultation will be a chance to comment on that and input into that and shape it. So I do encourage everyone here who has an interest to respond to that consultation when it's live. There's also work underway to identify sustainable water usage opportunities in non-household settings. So for example, water use for cooling and for energy. On top of this, there's a lot of scoping on how to take this even further, and I hope we get to touch on some of that in the questions. So as others mentioned, there's REIM, there's a need for recycling and reuse and retrofitting and everything in that space. There's also a huge challenge to cover in terms of how we change the culture of seeing water as an infinite and cheap resource. And on the other hand, my role also covers drought policy, which we won't get into, I think, here, but it's not a small challenge, and it's part of the whole resilience picture. As Munish mentioned, we've already got parts of the north in level 2 drought this year. So to summarise, I think there's a lot of policy levers underway to ensure a water resilient future, And I also think it's fair to say that there's a lot more work to be done on top of this. And I welcome the challenge that can come from other panelists and other people in this webinar. So I just want to close my intro by mentioning that some of the future direction of this work will be determined by the outcome of the review being carried out by Sir John Cunliffe, which I'm sure many people are aware of. This review will recommend reforms to reset the water sector regulatory system, and it's due to publish its final report imminently. It's definitely at the right moment to be working in water policy. It's an exciting time, especially when we're wanting to make changes that can ensure the resilient future we all want to see. So on that note, thank you so much for including me, and I'm really, really pleased to hand over to George from Anglian Water.
Thank you, Bryony, and good morning, everybody. So as Bryony says, I'm George Warren from Anglian Water. I'm the Integrated Water Manager here. And I have the wonderful job of trying to not repeat everything that everyone else has said already, which is always difficult when ultimately I want to talk to you about the fact that, as Kelly pointed out, the recently published report suggested 5 billion litres a day of a deficit by 2050. And that, I have to admit, assumes that we continue to use water at the same rate at which we currently do, associated with growth. And I mean, you would need to have been hiding under a rock if you weren't aware that this government are quite pro-growth with the 1.5 million additional homes. There you go, another repeat of what other people have said. Now, ultimately, we do not want water and the water scarcity aspect or the wastewater capacity aspect to become a blocker to growth. We are, as an industry, keen on promoting sustainable growth where appropriate to do so. Through an Ofwat Innovation Fund project, which I run, called Enabling Water Smart Communities, we recently did a study with Public First looking at the economic impact that water scarcity has across for growth across the east and south of this country. And actually, of the 150,000 additional homes that this 1.5 million pledge has proposed, over 61,000 of those would actually be delayed significantly beyond the term of this current government due to water shortages. That actually has quite a significant impact on the economy, with a reduction of 25 billion in investment in the economy. That includes £7 billion worth of tax that'll be lost as a result of the delays to those houses. Now, if all those new homes were to incorporate water reuse, and were to use 30% less water, then actually you'd be recouping £20 billion of that. That's not insignificant amounts of money. And it's that we normally lead with to try and encourage what I'm trying to push at the minute around my mission to unlock water reuse for new residential development. I think personally, it's crazy that we are flushing toilets with world-class drinking water. And funnily enough, I'm not alone in those thoughts. We actually did a recent poll of over 4,000 UK residents as part of that Enabling Water Smart Communities to really investigate whether there is that ick factor that is assumed around reuse within the home. And we were pleasantly surprised to see that 80% of those surveyed were interested in reusing rainwater to flush their toilets. And in 75% of those were interested in using grey water. And that study can be found on our Enabling Water Smart Communities website. And please rest assured that it's not a select few that
Oh, it appears that we may have lost George to a dodgy Wi-Fi connection. Oh, George, you're back. We just lost you for a minute or two, so your
sound... Did you really? I'm so very sorry.
Okay, you're back now, so please carry on.
Okay, it's the joys of being in the office, it seems. I think we're all encouraged to work from home, it would appear. So apologies, I'm not sure how much of the survey that you got in that, but I can please rest assured that people, over the 4,000 people that we interviewed across the UK, 80% of those were happy to flush toilets with rainwater. We also have costed this up to understand what's the additional cost associated with incorporating reuse within new residential development. If done on an individual house-by-house basis, roughly is around about £4,000 additional cost per property for both rainwater or grey water. But if we do it at community scale, actually that's significantly less. So harvesting stormwater at community scale is around the £2,000 additional cost per property, and grey water varies depending on density, but it's around somewhere between 6,000 and 2,500. Obviously, significantly cheaper for those dense developments, some of which you may well see in and around Cambridge at the present time. But sadly, though community reuse isn't easy to do right now, there are some legislative blockers, or rather an interpretation of existing legislation by our Drinking Water Inspectorate. This is often referred to as the wholesome water issue, which currently prevents suppliers from providing anything other than drinking quality water for domestic purposes. We are working though closely with Bryony and her colleagues from Defra to try and address this, and are actually working closely with the Drinking Water Inspectorate. We are looking to create guidance with them to help inform those standards. It should be pointed out though that you can reuse water for certain uses within the commercial sector, and we would actively encourage that right now. There are a wide variety of uses which do not require drinking water for that. And you'll have seen, or hopefully people will have seen, that the National Framework for Water Resources recently published a non-potable water reuse opportunities paper, which goes through all the potential sources and potential uses that may be most applicable for it. We would certainly like to see that come to fruition, and would encourage things like rainwater, which could otherwise be considered to be nuisance or problematic water when it could create flooding, grey water, and even treated final effluent, so that water that is cleanly discharged from sewage treatment works. We think there's some great opportunities there for the use of that as an alternative source of water. Ultimately, we need to be looking at the quality of water needed, rather than assuming that all uses require world-class drinking water. And I'll probably leave it there, Munish, and pass back to yourself. And apologies for the quality of the internet, it would seem, in Huntingdon today.
Thank you, George. It was only a very short interruption, so no problem at all. We got your very powerful messages nice and clear. So if we could bring all the panelists back up onto the screen, that would be great, so that we can see everyone. Fabulous. So I hope you agree that that was a very wide-ranging and rich set of propositions put forward by Kelly, Andrew, Bryony, and George. I'm going to start with a general question. I'm just trying to pick through the themes, I suppose, of what we spoke about. And all of you in different ways talked about the sort of commercial aspects of this. We had some really strong numbers, George, that you presented, but others also mentioned it as well. So I suppose to all of you, perhaps Kelly, to kick off with you, how do you foresee the valuation and lending sectors integrating sort of water considerations into their assessments, and what may this mean for the future of real estate investment, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, thanks, Munish, and what a great question, and what a very broad question as well. I think the first question for me to sort of ask back to everybody sort of listening is, do we value water? Is water, we often hear the term that water is too cheap, but how do we each individually and as collective sectors really value water? The other element is, do we really understand the challenge that we're facing with regard to water shortages in the future? And again, I say that because when it rains, it rains. And so there is this conception that we have enough water across the UK. But I would caveat that with, we just don't manage it very well at all. You know, there are some really great examples that show where we could manage it better. So one of the internal drainage boards in South Lincolnshire, in the period October 2023 to March 2024, pumped out enough water to the sea to fill Rutland water 10 times over. We're now in a period where we are facing the 6th driest spring since 56. But some would say actually it's out of the last 7 years, we've seen 5 of those 7 been a dry period through that spring summer. So we know that climate change is impacting on everything that we do. Statement of, do we really understand the challenge? And I'd like to hear Andrew's perspective on this, although he did sort of answer this actually in his introduction, was developers really not understanding that concept of the challenge, because unless you've been tied up in the conversations around water availability, water neutrality in the Cambridge area and potentially the southeast, you've had access to water. So what is the challenge when it comes, and how is it seen across different sectors? We've also got things like TNFD, so the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosures, and they require organisations to report on natural resources such as water. So there may be a bigger drive as well going forward, where companies, organisations, businesses are really starting to look at this value of water, what it means to them and what it could do for them. What we're hearing from investors is that water on its own is not an investable package. And so really it's how do we bring everything together to really show how water quality, quantity interacts with natural capital of biodiversity and other benefits that it can bring, and make it an investable package going forward. One sort of piece or one comment from our head of world research within Savills, Paul Tosterman, he was saying that over the coming decades, trillions is going to be spent on infrastructure in a bid to future-proof water resources. And he was saying that large projects often have a long payback period, so are often not not convenient for investors because of this large payback period. But he did say that the future is a recognition that private investment can support such as climate change and mitigate these extreme weathers. And one fact to finish on, he was saying an October 2023 official Monetary and Financial Institutions Forum survey indicated that 40% of public pension funds are expecting to increase investment allocations to infrastructure in the next couple of years. So I think within all of that, Munish, was that, do we really value water? Do we really understand the challenge? And we will see movement going forward.
Great, thanks, Kelly. And Andrew, perhaps I'd like to invite you into the conversation around this valuation point. You made the point that we don't price, blue and green infrastructure sufficiently. And I was really interested, because I know that Hill are sort of taking active action on this, particularly in your projects. Can you share some of the tangible innovations and water efficiency sort of measures that you put in place, and then perhaps comment on that point around commercial benefits?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Munish. So in Cambridge, there's a few schemes we've developed over the years. One is Eddington over at Knights Park, which is the university scheme where big infrastructure has been put in place, and that's grey infrastructure, blue infrastructure, and as people are starting to see the development starting to mature, green infrastructure. And that was to achieve a Code for Sustainable Homes Level 5 rating, which also meant an 80 litres of water per person per day. So that was hugely challenging at the time, and many of us remember the code from post-Lehman's crash. At around the same time, we developed a scheme called Viridio, which is a further scheme in Cambridge with the City Council, several hundred homes to a similar standard, using rainwater harvesting. And we undertook those opportunities in partnership to basically get ahead of future regulations and policies which haven't necessarily materialized. So why would you do it? Three reasons. One, statutory obligation to comply. The second point is license to operate. And license to operate for us is getting planning consent and actually delivering. And the third area is how we actually add value. So some examples there. Commercially, is there a value? There's not. There's not at the moment. We know deep down, and morally there is a value to that, but there's not. I think valuers, whether it's retail mortgages and homes, are starting to get their head around the performance of homes, energy and carbon use. B&G, biodiversity net gain, is starting to come to the fore with new regulations introduced in Feb last year. But water isn't on the table. So we think it's an opportunity. We think there's an opportunity. And if you're integrating these places and these functions and innovation, there's opportunity to create great place. And that not only leads into brand recognition, but also points of reference and preference. And in time, there will be an insurance premium associated with that and discounted mortgages. And very, very quickly, if I may, Munish,
Please.
Sustainability-linked loans are very quiet in this space in the residential sector. So there's a further opportunity there to integrate solutions. I'll stop if that's okay.
Yeah, lots of rich response there, Andrew. Thank you very much, and some really practical guidance. I want to turn to you, Bryony, because there's a brilliant question from our audience, Gemma, around EPC ratings for water efficiency of a building, a bit like we're established for energy usage, I suppose. I suppose that specifically, but also other more detailed policy levers and regulatory frameworks that could be brought in place. I'd love your comment on that, please.
Oh, yeah, yes, absolutely. I can't actually see the question about EPC ratings, but I assume
I'll read it out for you. So
sure, yes, thank you.
Are there any plans for EPC ratings to include a rating for the water efficiency of a building, asks Gemma. And please let that be an encouragement for others to also ask questions.
That's a lovely question, and I love the idea. So, I mean, currently, no, we're not planning to launch the equivalent of an EPC rating for homes, although we are doing it for water using appliances, not EPC, but kind of efficiency labelling. But kind of in a similar vein, we are working on, as I mentioned, working on the building regulations to make homes more water efficient, and especially in areas of water scarcity, make it so homes that are more water efficient, and also make it clear that that's not sort of the target, but developers can go further. And in terms of the value of that, I mean, I agree with other panelists that we need to review how we value water and water resilient and efficient design. But in simple terms, in areas of water scarcity, more water efficient homes equal, capacity for more homes to be built. And there's huge value in that. And there's huge growth capacity in that. And, we will always get back to growth in government at the moment because it's such a fundamental mission that's being driven. So, I think the principle of an EPC rating is being embedded in plans for the building regulation review. And then sort of further down the road, we're looking at things like how we can unlock more access to water reuse. Really welcome the comment that George made about working with DWI on wholesomeness of water. And yes, we're working very closely with them as well, just to make sure that everything that's done is done with public health in mind, but also is done in a way that actually frees up water and encourages resilience. So yes, thank you. And I'll take the EPC point away. I do like the suggestion very much.
I think it's very relatable from a consumer point of view, isn't it? We've all now got used to the A to E rating on appliances, getting used to them in our homes and buildings, and it feels like and even on food labeling, for example, a similar sort of thing. So that's great. Thank you, Bryony. I will come to you, Kelly, in very shortly, but I do want to give George an opportunity to comment on this whole value piece, because you set out some very strong sort of commercial case around how the lack of water could be a blocker to growth. You mentioned, the fact that we want to build 150,000 houses in the sort of Cambridgeshire and East Anglia region that would be compromised severely by the lack of water. But that's not what I want to go into. I was really taken by this this water smart communities initiative that you spoke about, and how if we took a community approach as opposed to a single dwelling approach, we could achieve some of the initiatives at a fraction, not even a fraction, a small percentage of the cost. And I just wanted to ask you to develop on that a bit more, and how that could, I suppose, enable us to have a more integrated approach to water management from a utilities provider point of view.
Yeah, thank you, Munish. Yeah, so touching on the sort of community, and I appreciate that I feel like I'm just banging a single drum here around reuse. Enabling water smart communities is across a number of different interventions, actually, but I'm probably going for the reuse thing because I feel like it's a very tangible element that, if unlocked, actually could really help in this space. So the piece of work looked at, we took 12 development sites, a range from 40 up to 600 properties and a range of densities, and set about redesigning those. and took 9 housing typologies and redesigned the internal pipework as well, and looked at what the additional costs. Now, I should point out, retrofitting that additional pipework once the building is already constructed will be considerably more. This additional cost is at the point of construction. So actually the internal pipework, putting that dual pipe system into the home, was actually only an additional £350 on average. Now, I don't think that's crazy money to future-proof houses, to enable them, those toilets, that washing machine, to be to use non-potable water. £350, I don't think that's crazy money. If you then start incorporating the treatment and the external pipework for that community system, then that starts getting up to a total of about £2,000. Now, I think every single water company is now offering an environmental incentive. Those that are encouraging reuse, and bear in mind that we've still got the issue around regulatory barriers or legislative barriers, and there's a reason why some of them haven't gone down the route of offering an incentive around reuse yet because of that. But those that are ahead of the game are offering in the same sort of ballpark. So Thames Water, for instance, are offering above £2,000 per property. So in many respects, and I appreciate it's not quite always as simple as, you may be comparing apples with pears to a certain extent, but on the face of it, they're offering more money than it costs to incorporate. And we will be following suit and possibly going even higher in the next year. So there will be a financial incentive to do so. Now, does that actually result in it being delivered? Well, I think we need legislative pushes as well. So Bryony points out that, the changes to building regs, I think that will help to push. I think there's an ability for local planning authorities to go even further if necessary. We have a real issue in the southeast of this country with regards to water scarcity, and we pulled together alongside the Environment Agency, Natural England, and all the water companies in our region, a thing called the Shared Standards for Water Efficiency, which was launched 2 or 3 weeks ago now. And that provides the data by which to, all the evidence to allow local planning authorities to go for between 85 and 95 litres per person per day, their policy. So that needs the push. And then you've got the additional financial incentive. I hope that we can start encouraging people to start considering this, assuming we can get over the legislative barriers. Now, that having a community system actually is far more resilient. So it's not, the issue isn't that if you go away or suddenly you have the kids return from university or, a big family party and everyone's using the toilet. If you've got a community system, you can take those fluctuations in demand, and it's a lot easier to manage. And actually, by incorporating it into the community SUDs, actually you can start to reduce that cost even further. So that assumes that you're providing the additional storage that's needed. Well, actually, the storage can be integrated into that SUDs design, in order to make that 2,000 even less potentially. We think there's some real benefit in this. And just to touch on the whole costings piece, we're also doing what we're referring to as a pond premium study. We believe that putting good blue-green infrastructure within a development actually leads to either an increase in retail prices for those properties, or them flying off the shelves quicker. And so we're doing a really deep dive into that to find historical data around whether it actually did constitute to higher pricing, or whether it actually led to being more in demand. And we've done a recent study with alongside the RHS on the climate resilient gardens, and the amount that people are willing to pay around a more resilient garden in that regard. So better soil, better plant species to behave, given climate change, the impacts of. And it's over 80% of those, and there was 500 people interviewed under this. Over 80% of those, and it seems strange it's the same percentage, but were willing to pay over £5,000, and a large proportion of which over £10,000 more. That's how much we expect the garden to actually cost additionally. So let's make these all things climate resilient. Let's make it more resilient for the water supply and have a community system. And we just start to see everyone's linkage with the water far greater.
Thank you, George. Again, really powerful comments. I know, Kelly, you had your hand up, but in the interest of time, I'm going to move to to some of the questions we've received, which are coming in thick and fast now. We will come back to you, Kelly, at the end for perhaps a point you want to come back to towards the end. But water metering is a known solution. Michael is saying that it can lead to up to a 15% reduction in water. Why aren't we seeing water metering being deployed right across, becoming almost like an option that is deployed more widely? George?
I can say that it is being deployed more widely now. So all water companies now have a smart metering program. We are well advanced in ours. We've installed over 1 million smart meters now, and by the end of this decade, 98% of our region will have smart meters installed within all residential properties. Now, the reason that smart meters lead to a reduction is people have greater insight into what their water usage is. And I think there's some things that we can play in terms of kind of behavioral sciences here around competition and kind of making you more aware as to how where you sit within the greater community in terms of your water usage and make a competition out of it. But actually, possibly more importantly, is the ability to spot local leaks. So that could just be a leaky loo. That could be a small leak underground. That could be an appliance that's not plugged in properly. Ones that go completely unnoticed. But actually, if we can see that between 2 and 5 o'clock in the morning that there's a constant demand, then we can notify and say, we think there may be a leak here. Now, that could be on our supply pipe. We'll check that as well. But actually, there is an ability there to identify those leaks. And that's all lost water, and for no reason. And actually, it's not through people not realizing it. It's through people not realizing it. It's not for them not wanting to fix it. And I think we need to be able to try and make sure that we reduce down those leaks. But yeah, smart metering is really key, because quite frankly, without that data, you just don't know where the usage is where the uses are happening.
Brilliant. Thanks, George. Bryony, did you want to come in to add anything on smart meters?
Yes, I'd love to. I love this question as well. I mean, I think for me, the metering question ties in really well with the culture change question. We see ourselves as living in a wet country, water is an unlimited resource, and typically people underestimate their water use by sort of around 100 litres per person per day. It's huge. It's just like a total disconnect between what we use and what we think we use. So yeah, metering is a tool to help us understand our consumption. And as George says, it's huge for behaviour change. It's actually really important for that. In terms of government approach, we're not looking at extending metering sort of mandatorily across the whole country at the moment. Partly, we're just waiting to see what John Cunliffe's conclusions are on metering. And it's always been a slightly tricky topic that whichever government, I've been in Defra for 11 years, whichever government is in place, metering is tricky. It's because we are working on having safeguards in place, social tariffs, but it's about sort of consumer choice and fairness to consumers as well. But metering doesn't have to mean being charged by meter. It can also just be used as a communication tool for people who perhaps are charged the standard rate but have a meter. So, I mean, I don't have a clear, this is what's happening. We will have metering across all homes by this date, but it's a very live issue. It's something that, we're hoping Cunliffe will have views on. And yes, I agree. It's a really useful tool for helping people understand water consumption.
Fabulous. Thank you, Bryony. And George, Daria has asked a couple of really interesting questions around, firstly, evidence that the new builds in particular are meeting the sort of requirements that are set out for them. Andrew, I was going to come to you just to ask that question first. How is there any research? How do you, for example, at Hill monitor that? And is there any research, perhaps for all the panelists, that we could point Daria to show that new builds are meeting the new standards? And then there's a second question, really for you, Bryony, around how does Defra envisage the mechanism of ensuring that high efficiency water fittings do not get replaced over time with efficient ones? So Andrew, should we come to you first around, performance of new builds, I suppose, in terms of water efficiency?
Yeah, sure. So lots of conversations being had through the Future Homes Hub and through the Next Generation Sustainability Initiative. And I think many of those members and similar businesses to ourselves have adopted 105 litres of water per person per day. And that's been in play for many years now. But of course, there are regulations, Part G's at 125. I think in terms of post-occupancy evaluation, I think I'd have to lean to some of my learned colleagues on the panel in that regard. I'm not sure we have undertaken much work in that space in this last period of time, but I think it's needed.
And therein lies an opportunity, because we talk about carbon and energy in post-occupancy evaluations, but never really talk about water, you're right, and the ones I've been involved in.
I think air quality is another area. I think overheating is another area. So I think water has certainly got a part to play. And as we know, water does impact carbon emissions as well. So yeah, opportunity.
Definitely. George.
Sorry, Munish, I appreciate I've probably held the mic a little bit too long in this. But yeah, we did carry out a survey of 280 properties, which is equivalent to about 1% of annual growth. So we carried that out last year, where we went in post-construction, pre-occupancy, to look at those fixtures and fittings that have been installed. Because actually, if we think about it, building regs and what we're talking about here ultimately is about what's put in the building rather than how it's used. Because despite the fact the litres per person per day is very much a usage piece. But if we go back to those fixtures and fittings, I mean, the big headline is it's really difficult to measure this stuff. So, I sent out a crew of people with measuring cups, stopwatches, tape measures. Yes, you can do a tap. You can quite quickly find out what the flow rate of a tap is. The trapezoidal equations to work out the internal dimensions of a toilet cistern, or the volume up to the point of overflow of a bath. You can imagine, and then it becomes quite difficult. And then when you start going on to the manufacturers, brochures and the likes, trying to find that information, that's even trickier, if honest. And Andrew's colleagues in procurement will have a real nightmare trying to find out, get that 14, that 10 litre per minute shower head and the likes, because it's not very well advertised, which is why it's so key that Bryony and her team bring through that mandatory water efficiency label, because that's going to be really key to it. I can say that when we look at post-occupancy, we're averaging around the 120 is what we're getting from those. So they're not necessarily meeting the 110, and I don't think that's down to the development industry and the poor the sort of fixtures and fittings. I think actually that's just the metric in which we just need to make sure that the right fixtures and fittings are going in to give us even a standing chance to start getting down to that 110 or below.
Really nicely answered, George. Thank you. I'm going to completely move tact and change tact rather, and go to a different type of solution that Kelly, you spoke to us about at the start of this webinar, nature-based solutions. And you talked about healthy soil and natural flood solutions. I was really intrigued by that. And I suppose I'd love you to share maybe an example or two of things that you're seeing where that is very successfully being implemented and what the results are. And I'm reminded of, you talked about dams and leaky dams, and it reminded me of beavers and things like that. So yeah, let's bring nature into this as a big solution provider. What are your thoughts on that, Kelly?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a great example that I urge you all to go and Google after this webinar is the Felixstowe hydrocycle. It's a fantastic sort of structural system which looks, well, originally the challenge was that water was flowing out over a salt marsh and causing damage to a salt marsh. So a range of stakeholders came together, and it was a 7-year project in the making and delivery. But what that system looks to do today is actually capture that water before it damages the salt marsh, and then looks to re-divert that water into 6 or 7 on-farm reservoirs, but also has a managed aquifer recharge element to the system as well. So when we start looking at nature-based solutions and how we can work together with nature, how we can work to support nature, I think that's a great example whereby that solution supported the protection of the salt marsh. It built resilience to the 6 or 7 on-farm reservoirs that were created, but it also provided a real systems resilience element to it with the aquifer recharge. So, you know, my plea, and I know there's lots of work going on, is to look at, you know, in an ideal world, I'd love to see them all down the East Coast, because there are surely opportunities where a Felixstowe hydrocycle system can support environmental protection and recovery, can support food production and the water required for food production, and where we start looking at food security, and can support groundwater resilience in order to build resilience for us all, for all systems. So I think that's a really great example. I think I just want to tie back into some of the comments that George has made around, you know, a circular economy, and where we're looking at reduce, reuse and recycle. And certainly I would just implore us all to think about this as a systems change and a systems thinking approach, because whilst we're looking at reducing and reusing and how that supports drinking water, actually the knock-on effect of that is it supports water for other sectors. So if we're able to reduce and reuse within systems, we're able to then support. And an example of that is in the summer of 2022, when we were in a high drought. We had restrictions across the country for agricultural abstractors. And yet, when we start looking at how water could be used during that period, it was still being used to wash cars and water gardens. And yet we weren't able to abstract from from an agricultural perspective to supply food. And there was an impact then on food produced. So I think if we can start really looking at this in a collaborative approach, we can start driving those protection and recovery, but also supporting all of the other sectors, and you know, ensuring that actually food security is part of this conversation as well.
Really well said, Kelly. It feels like that systemic approach and integrated approach across multiple sectors is actually critical, and including nature as one of the solution providers is critical to this. Thank you. Perhaps a concluding remark, Andrew, from you as well, just to summarize our conversation, and perhaps a call to arms to our audience.
Yeah, sure. So I think it's really important we tap into this positive wave of collaboration around placemaking and placekeeping. I think the placekeeping is the tricky one, but we need to do it through integrated blue, green, grey infrastructure. So I'm repeating what I said earlier with those policy and regulatory enablers. And we really have got to price and assess the intrinsic value that water brings.
Brilliant. And we've not really even talked about embodied water, not just in, well, we're maybe somewhat aware of embodied water in food, but not very aware of the amount of embodied water we have in other things in life, which is really critical.
And that's Kelly's circularity point, which I think is a big shout.
Yeah, it is. And not even before we get into the use of water in data centers and AI, etc., all of which is going through an explosive growth. Bryony, if I can come to you and ask for some concluding remarks.
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree. We haven't even scratched the surface. There's so much more. I could talk about data centers all you like, but it feels like from this, we are at a turning point. There's a huge appetite to build resilience, to be innovative. But I definitely accept that there's much more to be done, especially in the space of legislation and regulatory space. So I'm just encouraged that the current measures we've mentioned are welcome, you know, building regulations review, mandatory label, but I'm also hearing from you there's so much more that we have to do. Water reuse, rainwater harvesting, retrofitting. There's a bit of bravery needed and a lot of innovation, and also the world of changing public understanding and opinions. So I think my takeaway from this is there's some great work underway, but we also need to continue to work together very closely and to really drive this and make the case for this. So this feels like a lovely session to be doing this in. Thank you.
Thank you, Bryony. George?
I think to echo other people's points here, I mean, collaboration is going to be key on this. It really is throughout. And I think the more that we can do to support government and those regulators that are creating the legislation, the changes that are needed, the better, because we can't take another decade to sort things out. This needs to be done sooner rather than later. And so I would say, rather than the bashing that may have gone on in previous, let's help them. Let's provide them with the data. Let's gather that data, gather the evidence, and to help facilitate that change, because it's needed, and then we can all work collaboratively to ensure that the growth that this government wants to deliver can be delivered without having a detrimental impact on the environment.
Brilliant. I think that's a really poignant point to close the conversation. George, Kelly, Andrew, Bryony, thank you so much on behalf of Cambridge University Land Society and Savills, our sponsors, for your contributions. They're invaluable. I have dropped a link to the Cambridge University Land Society website in the chat, which hopefully everyone can see. We have a tour of Clare College is a retrofit coming up soon, and we also have that and more events outside of just this the Sustainability Forum as well. Thank you to the panelists. Thank you to the audience for your participation. We hope to see you soon. All the best.